everybody. I had a fall out of my chair moment a few months back when I read that while 83% of executives say their organization produces thought leadership content, only a quarter claim to have a robust strategy behind that. Today, we're going to dig deeper into what that research tells us about thought leadership and what we can do about it. Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders about business, life, and all points in between. And today I'm joined by Libby Rodney, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Harris Poll, the company who unearthed that data. Libby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about this. Can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and what the Harris Poll does?
Sure. So I'm Libby, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of the Harris Poll, which is really kind of more like the Chief Insights Officer. I sit across the Harris Poll and look for insights, data, and research and draw themes together. But I'm also the person who co-runs the Thought Leadership and Futures practice. So we work with Fortune 100, 500 companies on getting ahead of what's next from a thought leadership point of view, or from like a future point of view, looking into the next 3 to 5, 10 years. And then if you don't know Harris Poll, we are a global research company consultancy that's been around since the 1960s. And we are in the field every day, domestically and globally, kind of pulsing people's preferences, understandings, and desires. And so we use all those signals to then try to forecast into the future what people need to know, and where we find these kind of emerging desires popping out of from any and every corner of the internet and the world. So
yeah, I love getting your emails. You subscribe to the newsletter when you announce new research, and it's pretty wide ranging. It's really amazing where it comes in from different facets of life. So it's very interesting. How did you get into this line of work, Libby?
Yeah, so I actually started off in the advertising world, digital advertising for a long time, when digital advertising no one wanted to be a part of. So I was in the Razorfish days back in the day, when no one was paying attention to us. And then I went in traditional agency route to make sure I could make commercials. But I was always in strategy and planning, and I was always writing trends decks and presentations. And what I started to notice is the research we were getting from our clients just wasn't interesting. It wasn't good. The questions weren't good. And we're kind of just validating things that were known standards forever. So like we weren't questioning anything, and there was no creativity. So I had worked with John Gersma, our current CEO, for a long time in the agency world before that. And he said, hey, we're remaking the Harris Poll under the Stagwell brand, which is our holding company. He said, come on over and let's rethink research and make it much more creative, which is when we started, this about 10 years ago, when we started our thought leadership and futures practice. So to bring in more of that kind of agency strategy, creativity, plus research, and importantly, storytelling, so that the data doesn't get covered in, under someone's desk. And it's kind of like, what are we doing with these 80 pages of research that no one wants to pay attention to?
Right. I mean, I think that's so important. I mean, my personal definition of thought leadership is your own insights, your own beliefs and expertise. Any additional experts, subject matter experts such as yourself, entering the fray and sharing their thoughts, and then what you're producing, this proprietary. Can be quantitative, or I think you just do quant, but is it qualitative research as well?
Yes, no, a lot of our research is actually quite qualitative, validated by quantitative. So
perfect.
In my previous careers, I was doing a lot of qualitative work, and we would present this to the CMOs or the boards. And then eventually they would say, well, that's just 20 people, or that's just 30 people, or you're really cool and smart, but like, how do I validate this? So I think that's what's so interesting about pairing qual with quant is you get the emerging insights and the ideas, but then you get to validate it on a global or domestic level, and people can feel like it gives them enough understanding to make a real decision out of that.
I don't know a lot about market research, but the time I've spent in, the people I've talked to say that is exactly the right way to do it. So kudos to you guys. Do you think maybe you can just take a second here, because you are doing so much quantitative research, and we're going to get to the
Sure.
piece that you did here in just a minute, but I just want to get this out of the way. The quantitative research, I just read the ROI of thought leadership, and in the book they talk about a 14-to-1 ROI on thought leadership content, but their guidelines is pretty strict that it has to be research like you conduct, the proprietary research with I think it's just a lot of the criteria that you do to make sure it's statistically valid and et cetera. Can you give me your definition of thought leadership? I mean, is it limited to research alone?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I would actually expand it. I would say what we do is very much in the research realm. But I think when you think about, so I'm also got my futures hat on because I do the future stuff. I think when you think about thought leadership, it's okay. So the market in general is saying so many things, right? And there's so much of a sea of sameness. It's much like marketing. And so anything that to me that's thought leadership is when people have genuinely interesting new ideas, where they're trying to prove out a thesis that people haven't really talked about or discussed yet. And they have a point of view about where the world's headed as it relates to their brand or as it relates to their leadership style. But I think that's all the elements of thought leadership. So for example, you could be on stage and you could have a great analogy about, like I just saw it the other day at the Forbes CMO Summit, a great analogy about what makes brands relevant versus irrelevant. That is thought leadership because it's packaged up in your own personal understanding of that analogy. And the analogy was so strong in my mind, I still remember it. So I think that can make thought leadership without the data points. But what I would say for us and why our clients come to us is because a lot of times they're on stages, they're trying to get press, and no one wants to talk about just their new product release. It feels self-serving. So our definition of thought leadership, or what we help clients do, is like create a narrative that the media, the audience, and your company employees even want to hear. And that gives everyone kind of some value from the conversation that they normally wouldn't have achieved. So you're not just talking at them about, product lines or a new launch of XYZ.
Right, right. Well, along those lines, let's just circle back to the research that started this whole conversation. And again, thank you for joining us. You're a super busy person. We found that, again, the Harris poll, 83% of executives say their organization produces thought leadership content. And those same executives said only a quarter claim they have robust strategy behind it. And I think there's even more data about how effective they thought it was. Can you just talk a little bit about the research?
Yeah, so there's this big gap in terms of how important people see it versus how it's actually performing. And so I think what's interesting is there's this acknowledgement that this is an important pillar, but like how people invest in it and how effective they find it. For example, you said already that they don't have robust strategy behind it. Also, only 20% describe it as highly effective, yet they're getting massive returns on every dollar they put into thought leadership, is like a 14x return, right? So it's strong in that way. But I think the big challenges are that 66% say all thought leadership in their industry looks exactly the same. And so we did this research in 2022 with 500 business leaders and executives. And that's what we found then. I think now, if we were to rerun this research in 2025, it would be much higher probably than 66% said all thought leadership in their industry is looking the same. Because I don't know about you, but because of the AI generated content out there, we expect more and more lookalikes where it's like, this is what thought leadership looks like. Please replicate this for me. And we will see this unearthing of kind of AI slop into this thought leadership bucket. And so being more distinctive and standing out is for in our mindsets like the number one priority moving forward in that way to get the effectiveness and the priority of thought leadership out. So that's one thing. One other piece of new data I wanted to bring to explain why thought leadership is important today is we just came out. So across the board, we are looking at the bigger problem of just leadership, business leadership in America right now. And so we did a report with the US News report that said that 85% of Americans believe that most leaders prioritize their power, interest, and influence over the public interest. We also found that 82% believe the values held by business leaders don't align with everyday Americans. And 72% say the US is experiencing a business leadership crisis. Now, if we reverse this to 5-10 years ago, businesses were seen as the knight on the white horse in shining armor, coming to save the public interest and the American perception of like their hope and their ideas and what could happen. So to fall out of that much misalignment right now in today's market means that thought leadership isn't just intentionally in the market to give you a vision, but it's also to fight against the skeptics that no longer believe that you're in their best intent. So it's even working harder in today's market than it did in the past, or it needs to.
Libby, along those lines, we talk a lot about having your executive, your CEO, the founder, whoever, get out there and get active on social media, share this thought leadership content, but also be the face of the company and share their personal stories. Do you think that could possibly be an antidote for what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think what one of the things that we talk about is how social media, the creator economy, our lack of trust in institutions and organizations has created what we would call the intimacy economy. So what we mean by that is like where we form trust as a human to human level is very one-to-one. And so that's why big brands and organizations have kind of gotten the short end of the stick because people they resonate with them as like there's a big monolith over here. And of course, when some big monoliths act against the public interest or they're seen to do that, which is really an impact of the inflation we've seen over the last couple of years, that idea that the big company is protecting the consumer has totally switched and reversed just because of the increased prices. Consumers actually right now, 50% of them say that it's big businesses' fault of the rising prices as much as 50% say it's the government's fault. So again, businesses are taking a lot of pressure and heat. But what we have seen that reverses that feeling of that there's this big business just charging me more that's not aligned with my values is getting to know the individuals. And that's especially true when you look at younger demographics, millennials and Gen Z. So anyone under 43 in this country, they're so used to having a one-on-one relationship, right? This parasocial normal relationship that you have with podcasting, Instagram, TikTok, and all the things that it almost becomes more untrustworthy when you don't get to know that leader, their beliefs, their values, whether you agree with them or not. It's important to kind of understand who that person is and how they lead. And in previous research last year, we found that the more that a consumer feels like they know you, the more parasocial that relationship feels like, the more that they're also going to give you some grace or some forgiveness if you mess up. But the further you are away from them, like the more that you feel like just like a big entity making choices for them, the more that they are going to come to try to crush you when you make that mistake. So it is really extremely important in today's times to start to rebuild trust in that intimate marketplace kind of framework.
Right. It's the emotional bank account that you've built up over time with people with sharing your story, that can kind of shield you from some of that criticism. I mean, if you trot out the executive when you're in crisis situation, of course, that's all people are going to know him or her for, and that they're going to probably try and bring him down.
Right.
What I'm curious in that study, what you think about the strategy aspect and the effectiveness aspect of it, and why there is such a gap between what is actually happening. Like, what do people want out of their strategy? Do you have any insights in that or thoughts on that?
I mean, I think where the missing gap is a couple of things. So, A, there's a lack of credibility. So, we found in the research that 75% say it's challenging to create thought leadership that stands up to media scrutiny. And then as an organization that works, we have a working relationship with pretty much all mainstream media. We can attest to that. Like, journalists will come and look through how we proprietary collect data, what are our methods. Everyone is really concerned about anything that feels fake or false that they're propagating out into the market, and journalists are especially. So it has to have a stamp of credibility, and that's where strategy sometimes falls down. The other thing is just this lack of creativity, and again, this is why I got into the business. Like, the reason I got into the business was because there was this time in the late 2000s where they kept asking women, like, are you confident in your financial planning? Or like, women are not confident with money, women are not confident. And what the reality of the issue is that actually women think about confidence different than men when it comes to money. So if you keep asking that question, then you just perpetually get this story about women are not confident, versus you can ask lots of different things. So I think another one is creativity. Like, how do you talk about things? How do you package things? How do you make sure you're above surfacing new ideas? For example, something that we did last year that went viral was this idea of quiet vacationing. So last year we found in our out of office report, which tracked like vacation travel trends during the summer, that millennials weren't asking for time off. They were just taking time off quietly. And they didn't want to ask for time off because they felt like they were under this economic pressure and restriction. So they would just go work remotely from like a beach town or whatever and just not tell their boss. So we kind of went from this like quiet quitting version with Gen Z to quiet vacationing. And the press hadn't heard that before because it was coined. It was a concept, people could get behind it. So not only did the press pick it up, like, we had CNBC coverage, those types of things. I was on that. But social media picked it up and it went really viral on TikTok and things. And the reason it did was because there was a new tension we were uncovering and put some data behind. So some people were like, why are you telling our secrets to the world, Harris Poll? Like, don't tell her, like, don't validate. Yeah. And then other people were like, this shouldn't be happening because this is just a signal of toxicity in the workplace. But trying to get ahead of the narrative and then coin something is a really good indicator of the amount of creativity you have. And that creativity creates breakthrough power. And then I guess the last thing I would say is either brand or cultural relevance. So journalists are always looking for something that is about the current culture. But also where I've seen some brands or leaders go really wrong is that they're just talking about something that doesn't ladder back to their brand at all. And so if you can cover up the logo, just like in advertising, and you don't know why this doesn't or does connect to the brand, that is also where strategy goes completely wrong, because it could be great and interesting research, but if it doesn't help you storytell around your brand, then it's not actually going to create effective ROI for you in the future. And I think I come at that pretty uniquely because I was in the marketing world first, and that's all I did was brand strategy. So it's like I understand how you can't just do research for research sake either. Like, it has to be building toward a top line objective to make.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the brand and the ROI. I read something very interesting last night, and I should have written it down who the author of the book was, but he was
Mhm.
talking about creating your own category, and he was talking about thought
Mhm.
leadership, and he was talking about how a lot of thought leaders that we think of, Gary Vee is one he was picking on, um, get huge following and get tons of video views. And his point, though, was these people were saying a lot of things that's kind of generally believed with most people. So they talk about being authentic and put out a video of like, be authentic on social media, and everybody be like, yeah, be authentic, of course, and share it, and it'll go viral, and everybody, it like validates their own, their own thoughts. His point was, if you're going to be a true thought leader and create your own category, you need to say something completely different, like we're talking about. Have your own unique approach, create your own category. The problem is you're not going to get the impressions from your social media posts. You're not going to get the clicks, the engagements. How did you, when you were working on the brand level, and even just with the research you're producing now, is there any way for a thought leader to work around that and not kind of fall into the mainstream with what they're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's slightly um I think that might be simplifying it too much. Like it's putting it too much on a spectrum of you're either saying something really different or something the same. I would think about it as more of like if you go back to the brand building days of my life of like, are you a sage or a joker or jester? Like trying to get back into the brand kind of persona world. And it's like, that's okay. Some leaders can be agreeable. I think Gary Vee, for example, he might be saying something you already know, but he is doing it with like a thought provoking lens that is usually like about going out and creating action. So I think that's what it's like, even if it's to the author's point, something you might know, it's like it's the action and the energy behind it versus like someone who, I think of Kevin Kelly's like 1,000 True Fans that he then I think re-edited to 10,000 True Fans. And his whole point was like, if you can get 1,000 true fans that love your work
Hmm.
and that you're, distinguishable, you create your own voice. If those people will pay, that is your foundation to building a really interesting future. And I think the creator economy is based on a lot of that, like really getting to know someone, getting them to be really unique. But I do think there's probably something in the middle where it's like, if you're just chasing likes and engagement, because that's where that's probably the wrong key metric you should be looking for. I mean, from a business point of view, what I would want a client to look for is how many leads did this create, right? Like how many people downloaded what I was talking about? How many people came up to me after a speech that I gave at a conference? How many like real connections, either from a sales point of view or like a human point of view, did I make from giving this speech and point of view? And the last thing I would say about the agreeable point is I think a lot of people feel actually the way that people learn and expand their knowledge isn't going from this is normal to this is abnormal. It's just expanding it slightly. So it's like if everyone kind of agrees on this, then you expand their mindset a little bit here. It's much easier than going like, actually, it's over here. This is when you lose a lot of people. But it's like it depends on where and how you want to make your impact, But I'm here for the high thought provocateur. I mean, I like listening to those people, but I think, it just depends on who your audience is.
Right. I mean, it's hard to, what is it, steer the whole airplane and turn it real fast. And
Yeah.
that incrementalism tends to win out over time much more effectively. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, Libby. Any thoughts that you have or any words of advice? I mean, you yourself are a creator. You've got a great Substack going. I think you publish that on LinkedIn. You got to read her article that just came out. Um, And any advice that you would pass along to thought leaders out there in terms of what they can do to be effective?
I think the time is now. So what I mean by that is I think we're headed into a world over the next, if we're not here, next 2 years, where there is going to be so much generic slop out there, AI generated slop. And some people are theorizing that we're going to be in a post-human internet where there's more bots, navigating the web than there are people. And so I think in that world, what I'd really like people to think about is the quality of things that they're pushing out versus the quantity of things. I think we're way past the quantity game. We were in a quantity game for a while, right? It was like, how many can you post? How many things can you talk about? But right now, it's much more important to think about, what am I really saying? What has not been said before? And how is this actually adding value to people's lives? I think there's been a lot of critical thinking and fair points made against like the LinkedIn platform on kind of where that's going. But I think what's going to win out overall as we get into this further AI slop phase, and you can use AI. I'm not saying you can't use AI, but I'm talking about like the creative inputs that you put in and the critical thinking you put in, like just focus on that. I mean, really focus on trying to hone that in. And if you don't feel like you have that, find partners that do. There's a lot of really smart people who want to help thought leaders think differently about what they're talking about, but just do that. And then also, of course, I talk about a whole spectrum of things, but I think for most of our clients, to focus on a couple of key pillars and to focus on that for a while gives them a really strong point of view and point of credibility, because they're not trying to target the whole industry, the whole market, et cetera. And they get to create like more crafted visions about what does that actually mean. So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we were just talking about Joe Dispenza before, and I noticed that, like, I referenced a piece that he had written. I was reading his book, and then I heard a recent interview. The book was written like 5 years ago. Recent interview, he's still right on message. He's still got his pillars, and he's not deviating from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year I was at a conference, and the CMO of JP Morgan was talking, and she said, the thing that is the hardest thing and the most necessary thing is just to keep consistently messaging the same message across. And no one likes doing it, and it's incredibly hard, but that is the thing that will bring you the most results. And I think especially in today's time, especially when we look at likes and who's following us, it's really easy to get distracted away from that and to just go where the likes are. But I think ultimately it's got to be true to who you are and what you want to say out in the world. That's how you get true followers, right?
Right. One last question for you, Libby, and maybe this can't be answered in the time we have left, but your thoughts on which types of media are most effective for thought leadership content?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I mean, I think depends really who your audience is. So it's kind of nuanced in some cases. I think big Fortune 100, 500 companies, like stages are fantastic. Intimate stages are fantastic, along with YouTube and video content can be really useful. TikTok is fantastic for targeting anyone under 43, and you can just recontextualize that for Instagram. And then LinkedIn is just like a large giant player for anything B2B. But I've noticed a lot of my clients will take our thought leadership white papers and they will create kind of like intimate 100-person gatherings. They'll do it on large stages. They'll take modulars, and we'll do fireside chats digitally. We put it in podcasts. So it has a modular effect to it. But the leadership trend I notice more and more is like trying to gather senior leaders or affinity groups of leaders in person and talk about these things, not only showcasing the thought leadership, but then actually having conversations about, well, what does this mean to everyone in the room? So trying to connect the data or the thoughts to application is a super interesting point that I think we'll see more and more of. The idea of convening, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, that I can see that happening. I can see that being valid, especially in the online world where everything is digital. These face-to-face interactions and connections are going to be more and more important and distinguish what's real from what's not.
Yep.
Libby, thank you so much. This was an incredible conversation. If somebody wants to follow you, read your amazing newsletter, read Harris Poll's newsletters, how do they do it?
Yeah, sure. So there's three primarily ways. So there's, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Libby Rodney. That's super easy. But I also publish this this web newsletter on Substack. It's called The Next Big Think Substack.com. But The Next Big Think is it. And you can find it on LinkedIn. And then we also publish America This Week, which is just more trends every Wednesday of our latest data. And that is easy to find if you just follow our CEO, John Gersma, who's also like an incredible, interesting one-on-one thought leadership creator. So there you go.
Fantastic. And the article you just published today, what was the title?
Lottery over logic. So it's about why Americans are buying spells and like diving into witchery on Etsy. It's really fun.
It is fascinating. We'll put the link to that article in the show description. And again, thanks so much for joining us, Libby.
Thank you, Greg. It's been wonderful.